Tansei. I'm Chris Sanachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. More than 2,000 people from Sandy Lake First Nation, located in northwestern Ontario, have been evacuated since the Canadian Armed Forces was called to the community on Sunday. Officials today say the large wildfire there that is called Red Lake 12 has now grown to 163,000 hectares in size and is the largest wildfire in that area. Officials say that fire is now just 6 kilometers away from Sandy Lake and it remains out of control. The province says so far there isn't enough rain to help put out the flames, and they predict it could take months to put out a fire of that size. The fire has destroyed a number of cabins and a former youth fishing lodge owned by Sandy Lake. Sandy Lake Chief and Council says phase 1 of their evacuation measures have been completed, and they are pausing phase 2, which is a full evacuation. About 200 people remain in Sandy Lake to help care for people's pets and look after essential infrastructure. Meanwhile, Sandy Lake evacuees are staying in Kapuskasing, Cornwall, Mississauga, and Trent University in Peterborough. The Dryden Creek Wildfire burning just outside of Squamish, BC is still out of control this week and has grown in size despite efforts to contain it. A local state of emergency has also been called for the area. APTN's Tina House has that story.
Here in downtown Squamish, people are just going about their day and running errands or headed to work. But just above, along this ridgeline, is the Dryden Creek Wildfire. It was first reported on Monday afternoon and was only half a hectare. It grew to 5 hectares overnight, and now officials are stating the out-of-control wildfire has grown to 20 hectares in just 3 days. Officials believe it was human-caused. Numerous helicopters are scooping water from the nearby Squamish River in Brackendale to fly over 3 kilometers to drop on the fire that's burning alongside the Sea to Sky Highway on this steep mountainside. Houses, power lines, and a cell tower is very close to the fire.
It's being driven mostly by a west-facing steep slope. This is going to be the huge challenge for our crews on this fire. There's going to be places that are inaccessible to work, which is going to make this a drawn-out event.
Wilson Williams of the Squamish Nation joined us by Zoom and says Mother Nature might just be on their side at the moment.
You know, a little bit of relief because the winds are blowing away from the homes and residences, especially away from the reserve lands and our villages. But there's an evacuation alert for 100 plus homes right now that are up in the mountain area where the fire is.
And Larry and Vera Douglas are some of those that have received the alert. They've lived here in this house they built since the early 1980s and says it would be devastating to lose their home and neighborhood if the fire somehow changes direction.
And this home style was the very first home style that was built within the Squamish Nation territories, all territories.
And this is my wife's TV room. We each got our own separate TV rooms because I'm not into her shows and she's not into my war shows that I like to watch.
They raised their family here and say they are just not ready to leave it.
I'll grab all our family photos, right, and our important papers, of course, right, and some clothes, right.
Try to take what we could, and wouldn't be very much. Of course, I'd like to get the vehicles out of here, the Harleys, of course, and the Hummer and Vera's car on the side.
The Jeep.
And as much personal things that we can gather, you know, like family mementos and things like that. In my heart, I want to stick it out. You know, I don't want to leave. I don't have that even in my mind to leave. I want to stay right here.
Yeah. But if the current evacuation alert becomes an evacuation order, the Douglas family would have to leave as soon as possible. Larry has a message for those that are in the outdoors to take extra precaution because of the extremely dry conditions.
Whether it's after team sports, barbecues, family barbecues, garbage burning fires, yard waste fires, any kind of fires. Don't do those things. Don't do those activities. Think of the larger community. Don't just think of your own selfish satisfaction.
There are currently 93 fires burning across BC. Tina House, APTN National News, Squamish.
First Nations leaders from across Canada will meet virtually next week to discuss the Liberal government's proposed new legislation for Bill C-5. It aims to fast-track development projects deemed in the national interest. At a press conference in Ottawa on Wednesday morning, Assembly of First Nations leaders were busy fielding questions about what may be on the meeting's agenda. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Prime Minister Mark Carney wants C-5 passed by Parliament before the House of Commons rises for the summer. But AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak says things are moving too quickly, and First Nations need more time to evaluate how the legislation could affect their rights.
We've always stood forward and helped Canada, but at the same time, when there's bills being rammed through that could affect our rights, and we just got the bill on Friday, a draft, the draft bill. We need time, of course, to legally review it, politically review it as well, and we're not being given that time.
AFN Regional Chief for British Columbia, Terry Teegee, was also at the Ottawa presser on Wednesday. He says free, prior, and informed consent does not necessarily mean individual First Nations have veto power over specific development projects.
No government has a veto, meaning that when we come to a decision, all governments come into a room to make a decision together. And I think, First Nations certainly, as a part of this, need to be part of the decision-making process.
TG says if all parties take the time to build consensus, it can be achieved. But at the same time, he says Canadian governments have historically used the term national interest as a way to bypass Indigenous rights altogether.
We're in the middle of a tariff war, and there's these external pressures upon Canada, British Columbia, and what have you, where there's a big push for many of these projects. However, far too often we've seen this in British Columbia, we've seen it in Canada as well, is that it's at the expense of our rights, title, and interest.
Woodhouse adds the appropriate time for governments to consult with First Nations is while legislation is being drafted, not after it has passed into law.
They want to push through this legislation right to the end of this month, and I think that that's the wrong way to go. And even though they have committed to meet with First Nations leadership, they've committed to that for this summer. The Prime Minister himself will meet with chiefs. I think you need to do that before you pass any legislation so that they can have input.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The northern Saskatchewan community of Beauval is inviting members of the media today to help reveal its plans to extend search areas surrounding the former Beauval Indian Residential School. English River First Nation began its extensive ground-penetrating radar search from the residential school site in 2021 and later found 93 anomalies. 4 years later, there is now a new total of 153 sites that have been identified as potential unmarked burials located around the Mission Cemetery and in the lower fields where the residential school buildings once stood. Sadly, organizers say there may still be more unmarked graves as they speak with more residential school survivors. Officials also say the previous 93 sites within the cemetery appear to be burials conducted according to Catholic burial customs, but say the other burials outside of cemetery grounds are extremely concerning and may indicate illicit activity. English River First Nation will speak on their findings today at 1:30 p.m. Central Time in La Plonge Indian Reserve. In Toronto, a controversial statue is once again looking over the grounds of Queen's Park. The monument of John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, had been boarded up because of repeated vandalism. But as CTV's Queen Park Bureau Chief Siobhan Morris reports, the coverings came down on Wednesday and is already creating a lot of reaction.
After 5 years in a plywood box, a statue of Canada's first Prime Minister at the edge of Queen's Park is back in open air. Work to remove hoarding and scaffolding began Wednesday morning. The monument to Sir John A. Macdonald boxed up after being defaced in July 2020. a summer of racial reckoning and coming to terms with Canada's legacy of residential schools, a system Macdonald was an architect of.
He's a controversial figure, and he is also, the issue surrounding residential schools is still very raw for many people.
Last month, a legislative committee voted to clean Macdonald and dismantle the box. There was no consensus on how to reflect on a chapter that can't be escaped.
I think it's frankly an exciting day to be reminded and acknowledge our history.
Ontario's only MPP from a First Nation notes the statue's return lands during Indigenous History Month. A few weeks ago, he described Macdonald's likeness as much more than a figure of bronze and granite.
It's a statue of oppression. It's a statue of colonialism.
While the Speaker stresses the statue isn't going anywhere, discussions with Indigenous Ontarians will continue about changes or additions.
Have something on site that speaks to the pain that they suffered because of the residential school system, but also celebrates everything good about the contributions Indigenous communities have made.
A permanent plaque acknowledging history can't be changed, not sufficient for this woman watching on.
There should be more story, like a visual story about why people are so angry about him.
Others glad to see Macdonald overlooking downtown Toronto once again.
Hopefully it's a sign of protests being a little more cool.
The statue has a new protective coating to repel paint and is under the round-the-clock watch of legislative security. Skelly says she welcomes protests for people to share their hurt.
But we have to do it peacefully and we have to do it respectfully.
There's no specific timeline for that consultation with Indigenous communities about how they'd like to see themselves represented at Queen's Park. But the Speaker says she'd like to see some sort of agreement as soon as possible. At Queen's Park, Siobhan Morris, CTV News.
Indigenous educator coordinator Jeff Capo in Saskatchewan is being recognized for his years of work. We'll have that story for you when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Saskatchewan now, where Indigenous education coordinator Jeff Capo is being recognized for his work with students at a community school in the heart of Regina. Here now is CTV's Damien Smith with more on Capo's Sustainable Development Award and the inspiration behind the programming.
Last month, Jeff Capo received an award from the Saskatchewan chapter of the Regional Centre of Expertise for Achievement in Education for Sustainable Development, in recognition of the Mamawe-Kakaskitana land-based education program at Thompson Community School and how it contributes to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
Receiving that award lets us know that there's more out there for our children than just a regular classroom learning.
The program teaches Indigenous and non-Indigenous students about being stewards of the land.
Some of these students came out here being very shy. Some of our Indigenous students, they felt that they didn't belong, but when they start to see themselves on the land and learn about the land, they started that belonging piece.
On Monday, a group of grade 7 students ventured out to Wascana trails to learn about local medicines such as hazelnut and white sage.
Traditionally, this was as close to nature as we could get. As time has begun, it hasn't been touched in years, so this land is the way it was for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's still the plants, our traditional medicine still grew out here.
And for Capo, it's all about connecting with the land.
One of the children said last week, I feel so at peace being outside, being on the grass, listening, watching the sun, the wind, just knowing that you're out there, that you're not confined to those four walls.
The program started with high school students, but Capo and Regina Public Schools felt the need to start in middle school when education on Indigenous practices becomes an everyday learning experience for those in the classroom.
It's very different because then you actually get to see what he's talking about. He shows examples.
It's free to do this outside and it's easier to do it than having to go to the store and buying it.
Capo has also received a Prairie Trailblazer Award from Sask Outdoors for his outstanding leadership and lasting impact in outdoor education. Damien Smith, CTV News, Regina.
A new Indigenous-owned cafe called Greywolf is brewing up some strong coffee and strong community connections in a Manitoba small town. And as APTN Sarah Bettens tells us, the owner, Tanya Clark, made her dream a reality and explains the story behind the cafe's name.
When Tanya Clark remembers her late father, George Buddy Clark, he's sitting with his grandkids with a hot beverage in his hands.
He would always come and sit and have his tea, and I say tea because he would tell everyone that it was tea, but it was actually coffee with sugar.
A residential school survivor, George never had the opportunity to attend ceremony or receive his spirit name.
Our names are how we identify and how we transition into the spirit world. So once he did pass, we held a ceremony for him, and that's where we found out, his name is Greywolf Man.
Today, his daughter is honoring his legacy by launching the Greywolf Cafe in Dugald, Manitoba. Since its grand opening this weekend, the cafe has been the talk of the town, located just outside Winnipeg.
We had a line up throughout the door all day long until we locked the door at 4.
The menu offers locally roasted coffee, sweet treats baked by Clark's mother-in-law, and fresh Bannock breakfast sandwiches.
We had Dana Constant come in, who's a Red Seal chef from York Factory First Nation, and she put the entire kitchen together. She trained all the staff, and we perfected together a Bannock that would be soft enough for the breakfast sandwiches.
The cafe also features personal touches, like this set of chairs Clark inherited from her father.
When we decided just under a year ago that we were going to do this, we found Destiny Seymour's prints and recovered the chairs, and we always had the vision to have them in front of a nice, beautiful fireplace.
Eager to make full use of the space, Clark is already planning a calendar of events for the summer.
But we'll also have community events like seniors afternoons, paint nights. Jackie Travers has agreed to come in and host a paint night in August.
For her, the cafe is more than a morning stop for a caffeine fix. It's a place for community to gather, heal, and share stories, including the one behind Greywolf.
My grandmother went to residential school. My dad went to residential school. I didn't grow up in community, didn't speak the language. My kids don't speak the language, but my grandson was the first one to start dancing powwow and learning our language. So in my short lifespan, you see really wonderful things happening.
For hours of operation, visit greywolfcafe.com or check out the cafe's Facebook page. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
We now want to tell you about this week's third web poll question. At aptnnews.ca we ask, do you agree with the federal government increasing money on military spending? Your answers are yes or no. Go to our website at aptnnews.ca/polls to have your say. We will post the results on next Monday's show. It's Thursday, and that means we have brand new previews of APTN Investigates and APTN InFocus podcasts. We'll be back in less than 3 minutes. Stay with us. Starting on East St. John's 21, Halifax, sunny there and 19. Happy Valley Goose Bay, rain 18, Cartwright 21 there. Saguenay 14, St. Jovite 19 and partly cloudy. Sarnia 15 and sun, London 18 and sun. Big Trout Lake 8, Sioux Lookout 10. Norway House 10, Churchill 15. 14 in Gimli, Barons River 13. Saskatoon 13, Regina 18. 12 in Buffalo Narrows, La Ronge 10 and sunny. Showers in Peace River at 20, Fort McMurray, rain there at 14. Medicine Hat, rain in 22, Lethbridge, rain in 17. Tofino 16, Bella Coola 20. 22 in Fort Nelson and Smoky there, Dees Lake 14 in showers. Watson Lake 21 in rain, Whitehorse 18. Fort Liard 25, Trout Lake 25. Fort McPherson 23, Inuvik 23. 6 in Whale Cove, Baker Lake 5. And Resolute -1, Agulik +1. Thanks for staying with us. APTN Investigates is back this week with an all-new episode. APTN journalist Christopher Reed looks into the recent battle over LeMay Forest and the mystery surrounding unmarked graves at the site. Activists fought for months to protect the land from development before Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew stepped in at the 11th hour. Here's a preview.
St. Norbert, a distinct community on the south end of Winnipeg. The place where Louis Riel's dream of what Manitoba should be took shape. And this is a former orphanage and home for unwed mothers, Asile Richot. The orphanage began in 1904 and stopped operating in 1948. But its impact is still being felt. Especially in these woods, the final resting place of an uncertain number of children, many of whom were likely Métis.
If you compare the numbers of children that died at the Asile Richot, it is overwhelming.
Quite a few people were really wanting to see this land get protected and honored the way it should.
And you can catch Cherished Woods, The Fight for LeMay, airing this Saturday on APTN Investigates. And finally for us, tattoos have different meanings for some. It can be sentimental or a badge of pride, but for others, it's a painful reminder of the past. APTN Investigates' Tamara Pimentel joins our host, Sierra Bettens, on this week's InFocus podcast to speak more about her story, Skin Deep. Take a listen.
Della is just the perfect person to go in and rent to, share a story with, somebody that you can trust. And she also offers other services there. She collects donations, so if you need any of that sort of thing. So it's not just the tattoo removal itself. That's definitely the reasoning behind it and the story behind it. But going there and getting that tattoo removal is very much a safe space for all of these women as well.
And the latest episode of APTN InFocus and all of our other APTN News podcasts are available wherever you listen to your podcasts. And that's your daytime newscast for this Thursday. Dennis Ward is back for your evening newscast in a few hours. It will include a wildfire and evacuation update from Indigenous Services Canada and Indigenous Services Minister Mandy Golmasti, and also a brand new segment of Truth in Politics. Please join Dennis then. From all of us at APTN National News, hi miigwech masicho, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next day.